So, whatever happened to the original full-size Death Star prop from Star Wars? Well, you might not believe it, but let's find out. Movies,
Music and monsters.
Hey guys, Dan Monroe here talking about movies, music, and monsters. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to briefly share some really cool personal music news. As you may or may not know, my wife and I run a music studio here in New York State where we teach voice, guitar, and piano, and literally just this week on the TV show The Voice, one of our students that my wife personally trains had all 4 seats turn around for her on The Voice. Her name is Sydney Sterlace, and we are so incredibly proud of this girl's amazing talent and my amazing wife for helping to get her there. So, if you happen to be someone who watches The Voice and you see Sydney, well, throw some positive energy her way. I mean, how cool is that? Thanks, guys. Well, this is definitely one of those stories that gets passed down over the years as folklore, eventually passing into legend, lovingly told around campfires by overly enthusiastic movie dads, inspiring the wide-eyed children to become the next generation of fans. Did I ever tell you the story of the fate of the Empire's deadliest weapon, the Death Star? Well, when it comes to classic Hollywood movie props, as you know, there are very few stories that actually end up with a happy ending, but this, as odd as the story is definitely one of those. So grab your super powerful planet-destroying space station and your favorite Kyber crystal with a bucket of stale popcorn, and let's dive in. When George Lucas sat down to write the treatment for the original Star Wars, no, not A New Hope, just Star Wars, he wrote a very long treatment which basically encompassed 3 different acts. So when time came to make the first film, Star Wars, he decided to use only the first of the 3 acts, which didn't have a Death Star at the end. That was at the end of the 3rd act. But he thought to himself, what the heck, this movie might end up just being a bomb, so I'll pull the Death Star from the end of Act 3 and put it at the end of Act 1, which coincidentally is the exact reason why there was a second Death Star at the end of Act 3, Return of the Jedi, as it was always there to begin with, so he just made a second one. And then Disney made a 3rd one, and then a 4th one. Lucas gave the original task of designing the Death Star to concept artist and spaceship modeler Colin Cantwell, who had worked with Stanley Kubrick on the 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey. The model was constructed originally in 2 separate pieces. However, the 2 parts weren't really fitting together all that well, so it was at this point that they decided they would add a trench going around the middle of the space station. Yeah, that's why that's there, to hide the fact that it didn't really fit together all that well. Lucas liked the idea, and the Death Star model was then physically created by John Steers, a special effects expert who also created James Bond's Aston Martin DB5, Luke's Landspeeder, and a whole ton of other really cool stuff. Well, jumping ahead just a little bit, the Death Star model was now completed. The film at this point may or may not have been released yet. I'm not really sure, but a whole ton of original Star Wars props, including the Death Star, were placed in storage in California in a facility called Dollar Moving and Storage. 20th Century Fox basically rented storage spaces to store movie props in case they might need them again one day. But in this particular case, they just decided they didn't want to pay the rent on the storage space anymore and told the facility to just toss everything out. Whoa, really? Well, one of the employees that worked at the storage facility named Doug recalled that some of the Star Wars stuff was picked up by some of the crew that worked on the film. I assume for sentimental reasons maybe, but not the Death Star. So Doug took it home, and thank the Dark Lords of the Sith that he did. Doug kept the Death Star on display in his home in California for about 10 years until around 1988 when he moved to Missouri and stored the Death Star at his mother's antique shop called Sutter's Mill Antiques, where it was shortly thereafter discovered by Todd Franklin, who was like just driving by the place and looked out the corner of his eye and saw the Death Star. I mean, what are the freaking odds? Beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. Ah, the original 1977 Death Star model. Now, Todd not only started his own research to make sure this was the real deal, but get this, he actually contacted Lucasfilm to ask them if they wanted it back, and they said, "The model was destroyed during the filming of the movie. Didn't you see that? Remember at the end of the film it blew up?" Okay, not really sure what qualified person they had answering the phones that day, but whatever. Well, Todd correctly assumed that this was indeed the actual Death Star and drove back to the antique shop to somehow strike a deal with the owner and buy it. Well, too little, too late, as the owner said they had just sold the model to a country western music show called Star World, where it remained on display for about 5 years until 1993, when Star World went out of business. So Todd, along with his brother and another guy, headed back to Star World to see if the Death Star was still there, and indeed it was, literally sitting in the corner being used as a trash can. Yes, a trash can with garbage literally sticking out of the hole which used to be the primary radar dish. So yeah, they bought it. Now, these guys kept the Death Star for years, replacing the original missing radar dish with a replica made out of cardboard, and even again at this point, they reached out to Lucasfilm to let them know what they had, and Lucasfilm said, we don't want it. Anyway, in 1999, Star Wars collector Gus Lopez contacted the boys to see if they'd be interested in selling the Death Star, which they did, and the model was then shipped to Gus's home in Seattle, where at the time it was just a very small 2-bedroom apartment, so the Death Star went back into storage until they eventually bought a larger house. I mean, come on, what better reason to buy a house? Honey, we need a brand new, bigger house. We got us a Death Star, which is where the original 1977 Star Wars Death Star now resides in all of its incredible imperialistic glory, beautifully displayed in an enormous custom plexiglass case, and thank God this guy cares enough about this prop to actually share it with the world. He loaned it out to the EMP Museum in Seattle, which is now named the Mopop Museum, for over 5 years so other people can enjoy it. The museum even arranged to have a professional model maker create a brand new accurate replica radar dish for the Death Star, finally restoring this unbelievable piece of cinematic history, literally rescued from the freaking trash. How cool is that? I hope you guys enjoyed that brief yet informative and somewhat comical story of what happened to the original Death Star. And if you did, and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole bunch of new videos coming up really soon that I know you guys are just gonna dig. And please feel free to stop back anytime as we together continue the conversation on movies, music, and monsters. Movies,
Music and monsters.